Question 1. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of scores on a newly implemented aptitude test for a critical role, with a majority of candidates scoring in the upper quartile. However, there is a noticeable divergence between these high test scores and the actual on-the-job performance metrics of the individuals hired. Considering the purpose of aptitude tests in identifying individuals with the potential for success in specific roles, which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach to evaluating the effectiveness of this aptitude test? Option A. Recommend discontinuing the use of the aptitude test immediately due to the perceived discrepancy between test results and observed performance, without further investigation. Option B. Analyze the correlation between the aptitude test scores and subsequent performance indicators of the hired individuals to determine if the test is accurately predicting success. Option C. Focus on the statistical distribution of scores, such as ensuring a normal bell curve, as this is a standard indicator of a well-designed aptitude test. Option D. Conclude that the test is highly effective because the majority of candidates are achieving high scores, indicating a strong pool of potential talent. The correct answer is B. Analyze the correlation between the aptitude test scores and subsequent performance indicators of the hired individuals to determine if the test is accurately predicting success. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to interpret complex data from a monitoring system and make a judgment about the effectiveness of a critical assessment tool aptitude tests without resorting to purely quantitative analysis. The challenge lies in understanding the qualitative implications of the data and aligning it with the intended purpose of aptitude testing within a professional context, such as employee selection or development. It demands a nuanced understanding of what constitutes a good or bad outcome beyond simple pass/fail rates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing that aptitude tests are designed to predict future performance or potential. Therefore, the most effective monitoring of their utility involves assessing whether the individuals selected or developed based on these tests actually perform as expected in their roles. This aligns with the fundamental purpose of aptitude testing, which is to improve organizational outcomes by identifying suitable candidates or developmental needs. This approach is best professional practice because it directly links the assessment tool to its intended business objective, providing a practical and meaningful evaluation of its effectiveness. It implicitly adheres to ethical guidelines that mandate the use of valid and reliable assessment tools that serve a legitimate organizational purpose. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the statistical distribution of scores, without considering the subsequent performance of the individuals. For example, if the scores are normally distributed, this might be statistically expected, but doesn't tell us if the test is actually identifying individuals who will succeed. This fails to address the predictive validity of the test, a key criterion for its professional use. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a high pass rate indicates the test's effectiveness. A high pass rate could simply mean the test is too easy, or that the selection criteria are too low, leading to the inclusion of individuals who may not possess the required aptitudes for optimal performance. This approach mistakes a superficial outcome for genuine predictive power. A third incorrect approach would be to discontinue the use of aptitude tests based on anecdotal feedback from a small group of employees, without systematically evaluating the test's impact on overall performance metrics. This is an unprofessional and potentially biased reaction that ignores the broader, objective data that could be gathered. It fails to uphold the principle of evidence-based decision-making. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the evaluation of aptitude tests by first clearly defining the objectives for which the tests are being used. This involves understanding what specific abilities or skills the test is intended to measure, and how those abilities are expected to translate into job performance or developmental progress. The next step is to establish clear metrics for success that are directly linked to these objectives. This might include performance reviews, productivity measures, retention rates, or successful completion of training programs. Data from the monitoring system should then be analyzed in relation to these metrics. If the data suggests a disconnect between test results and actual outcomes, further investigation into the test's validity, reliability, and the appropriateness of the cutoff scores is warranted. Ethical considerations require that assessments are fair, unbiased, and demonstrably contribute to legitimate organizational goals. Question 2. The performance metrics show that a candidate scored below the established benchmark on a critical reasoning aptitude test, which is a component of the selection process for a specialized role. However, the candidate has extensive relevant experience and performed exceptionally well in the interview. What is the most appropriate next step? Option A. Proceed with hiring the candidate without further consideration of the aptitude test, assuming their experience and interview performance compensate for any perceived weakness. Option B. Immediately reject the candidate based on the aptitude test score, as it indicates a fundamental deficiency. Option C. Conduct a further assessment or interview focusing on the specific skills measured by the aptitude test, and review the candidate's overall profile holistically before making a final decision. Option D. Re-administer the aptitude test immediately to see if the score improves, without considering other factors. The correct answer is C. Conduct a further assessment or interview focusing on the specific skills measured by the aptitude test, and review the candidate's overall profile holistically before making a final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where an individual's performance on aptitude tests, a key component of assessing suitability for a role, is below the expected benchmark. The challenge lies in interpreting these results within the context of a broader assessment, avoiding over-reliance on a single data point, and ensuring fairness and adherence to established assessment protocols. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misinterpreting the results, leading to an unfair assessment or overlooking valuable candidates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a holistic review of the candidate's overall profile, considering the aptitude test results as one piece of a larger puzzle. This aligns with best professional practice in assessment, which emphasizes a multifaceted evaluation. Regulatory frameworks for aptitude testing, while not explicitly detailed here as no specific jurisdiction is provided, generally advocate for the use of tests as part of a broader selection process, not as sole determinants of suitability. This approach ensures that a candidate's potential is assessed through various lenses, including experience, situational judgment, and other relevant skills, thereby mitigating the risk of a single test score unfairly disadvantaging them. Ethically, this promotes fairness and equal opportunity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately disqualify the candidate solely based on the aptitude test scores. This fails to acknowledge that aptitude tests are predictive tools and not definitive measures of an individual's entire capability or potential for development. Regulatory guidelines for aptitude testing often caution against using a single test as the sole basis for selection decisions, as it can lead to discriminatory outcomes and may not accurately reflect job performance. Ethically, this approach is unfair and can be seen as arbitrary. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the aptitude test results entirely, assuming they are irrelevant. This is problematic because aptitude tests are designed to measure specific cognitive abilities that are often crucial for job success. Disregarding these results means overlooking potentially valuable insights into a candidate's strengths and weaknesses, which could lead to suboptimal hiring decisions. It also implies a lack of adherence to the established assessment framework, which may have regulatory implications if the testing was mandated or recommended by a governing body. Ethically, this approach demonstrates a disregard for the assessment process and its intended purpose. A third incorrect approach is to adjust the scoring or interpretation of the aptitude test results to fit a desired outcome without a valid, documented rationale. This undermines the integrity and objectivity of the assessment process. Such manipulation, if discovered, could lead to regulatory sanctions for violating assessment standards and ethical guidelines related to fairness and transparency. It also erodes trust in the assessment process and the organization. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a balanced and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the purpose and limitations of the specific aptitude test used. 2. Considering the test results in conjunction with all other available information about the candidate, e.g., resume interview performance references. 3. Applying established scoring and interpretation guidelines consistently. 4. Documenting the rationale for any decisions made, especially when deviating from standard interpretations. 5. Consulting with HR or assessment specialists if there are ambiguities or concerns about the results. This systematic approach ensures fairness, objectivity, and compliance with professional standards and any applicable regulations. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a candidate scored exceptionally well on a general aptitude test designed to measure problem-solving and critical thinking skills. However, during the behavioral interview, the candidate struggled to articulate specific examples of how they have applied these skills in past roles, providing vague and generalized responses. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach to interpreting these findings for a selection decision? Option A. Assume the aptitude test score accurately reflects the candidate's capabilities, and their interview performance was an anomaly due to nerves, proceeding with a recommendation based primarily on the test results. Option B. Interpret the aptitude test score as definitive proof of the candidate's readiness for the role, and recommend immediate hiring without further consideration of their interview responses or other relevant factors. Option C. Disregard the aptitude test results entirely, as the interview performance suggests a lack of practical application, and focus solely on the interview responses for the selection decision. Option D. Conclude that the candidate possesses strong theoretical aptitude but may lack practical application experience, and therefore, further investigation into their past performance and potential for on-the-job learning is warranted before making a final decision. The correct answer is D. Conclude that the candidate possesses strong theoretical aptitude but may lack practical application experience, and therefore, further investigation into their past performance and potential for on-the-job learning is warranted before making a final decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret the results of an aptitude test in a way that is both fair and legally compliant. Aptitude tests are designed to measure potential and specific abilities, but their application in selection or development must be grounded in objective evidence and avoid discriminatory practices. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of test scores to a nuanced assessment of an individual's capabilities in relation to the specific requirements of a role or developmental path, while adhering to the principles of equal opportunity and avoiding bias. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on a holistic evaluation. It acknowledges that an aptitude test is one data point among many. By considering the test results in conjunction with an individual's demonstrated experience, qualifications, and performance in behavioral interviews, a more robust and accurate assessment of their suitability or potential is achieved. This multifaceted approach minimizes the risk of over-reliance on a single measure, which could be flawed or not fully representative of an individual's capabilities. This aligns with professional standards that advocate for comprehensive and evidence-based decision-making in personnel assessment, ensuring fairness and maximizing the likelihood of a successful placement or development outcome. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the aptitude test score to make a definitive judgment about an individual's capabilities. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the inherent limitations of any single assessment tool. Aptitude tests, while valuable, can be influenced by factors such as test anxiety, cultural background, or the specific format of the test, none of which may accurately reflect an individual's true potential or suitability for a role. This approach risks making arbitrary decisions, potentially overlooking qualified candidates or misplacing individuals, and could lead to claims of unfair selection practices. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the aptitude test results entirely without a valid, evidence-based reason. While critical evaluation is necessary, wholesale disregard without justification is unprofessional. It undermines the purpose of conducting the assessment in the first place and fails to leverage potentially valuable insights into an individual's cognitive abilities or specific aptitudes. This can lead to decisions based on subjective bias rather than objective data, potentially resulting in suboptimal hiring or development choices. A third incorrect approach is to interpret the aptitude test results in isolation, without considering the context of the role or developmental objective. Aptitude is not an absolute measure. It is most meaningful when compared against the requirements of a specific task or position. Without this context, a high score might be irrelevant, or a moderate score might indicate significant potential for a particular area. This approach leads to misapplication of the test's findings and can result in poor decision-making that does not serve the individual or the organization effectively. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach aptitude test results with a critical and contextual mindset. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the purpose and validity of the specific aptitude test used. 2. Evaluating the test results in conjunction with other relevant data, such as work history, academic achievements, and interview performance. 3. Considering the specific requirements and competencies of the role or developmental program. 4. Documenting the rationale for any decisions made, ensuring transparency and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that assessments are fair, objective, and contribute to effective talent management. Question 4. The control framework reveals that a company is implementing a new set of aptitude tests for entry-level positions. To ensure these tests are effective and fair, the HR department is tasked with evaluating their utility. Which of the following approaches would best demonstrate the professional and ethical soundness of the chosen aptitude tests? Option A. Assessing the extent to which the test items appear relevant to the job tasks from a candidate's perspective. Option B. Reviewing the historical pass rates of similar tests used by competitor organizations. Option C. Correlating test scores with objective measures of on-the-job performance for a sample of new hires. Option D. Calculating the internal consistency reliability of the test to ensure its items measure a stable construct. The correct answer is C. Correlating test scores with objective measures of on-the-job performance for a sample of new hires. Explanation. The control framework reveals a situation where an organization is considering the implementation of aptitude tests for a new cohort of employees. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate method for evaluating the effectiveness of these tests, ensuring they are fair, predictive, and compliant with general best practices for aptitude assessment in a professional context. This requires a nuanced understanding of psychometric principles and ethical considerations in testing, rather than a purely statistical or computational approach. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on the predictive validity of the aptitude tests. This means assessing whether the test scores accurately predict future job performance. This aligns with the fundamental purpose of aptitude testing in a professional setting, to identify candidates with the potential to succeed in a role. By comparing test results with actual job performance metrics, the organization can empirically demonstrate the utility and fairness of the tests. This empirical validation is a cornerstone of responsible and effective assessment practices, ensuring that the tests are not merely measuring abstract abilities, but are relevant to the demands of the job. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the internal consistency of the test, e.g., Cronbach's alpha, fails to address whether the test actually measures what it's supposed to measure in relation to job success. Internal consistency indicates that the items within a test measure the same underlying construct, but it does not guarantee that this construct is relevant to job performance. This can lead to the selection of candidates based on irrelevant skills, potentially resulting in poor hires and a failure to meet organizational objectives. Ethically, using tests without demonstrated predictive validity can be seen as unfair to candidates and detrimental to the organization. Another incorrect approach that relies on the face validity of the test, meaning whether the test appears to measure relevant skills to the test taker, is also professionally deficient. While face validity can contribute to candidate acceptance, it is a subjective measure and does not provide objective evidence of the test's ability to predict performance. A test might look relevant but have no actual correlation with job success. Relying on face validity alone can lead to the implementation of ineffective assessment tools, wasting resources, and potentially discriminating against candidates who possess the necessary underlying aptitudes but are not impressed by the superficial appearance of the test. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted evaluation of assessment tools. This includes 1. Clearly defining the job requirements and the specific aptitudes needed for success. 2. Researching and selecting tests with established psychometric properties, prioritizing those with documented predictive validity for similar roles. 3. Conducting pilot testing and validation studies to confirm the test's effectiveness within the specific organizational context. 4. Ensuring the testing process is administered fairly and ethically, with appropriate accommodations for all candidates. 5. regularly reviewing and updating assessment methods based on performance data and evolving job requirements. Question 5. Compliance review shows that a financial services firm is seeking to hire new junior analysts. The firm is considering several aptitude tests to assess candidates' potential for success in this demanding role. Which of the following approaches to selecting an aptitude test would be considered the most professionally sound and compliant with best practices for fair and effective assessment? Option A. Choosing a test that is known for its speed of administration and low cost to expedite the hiring process and manage budget constraints. Option B. Opting for a test that has demonstrated strong predictive validity for the specific skills and competencies required for a junior analyst role in the financial services industry, supported by independent research and validation studies. Option C. Using a test that was recommended by a senior executive who had a positive personal experience with it in a different industry years ago. Option D. Selecting a test that has been widely used by other reputable financial institutions for similar roles, assuming its general effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Selecting a test that has been widely used by other reputable financial institutions for similar roles, assuming its general effectiveness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting an appropriate aptitude test for a critical role. The challenge lies in balancing the need for a comprehensive assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, while ensuring the chosen test accurately predicts job performance and is free from bias. Misjudgment can lead to suboptimal hiring decisions, increased training costs, and potential legal challenges related to discrimination. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of various aptitude tests against the specific requirements of the role. This includes considering the test's validity. Does it measure what it claims to measure and predict job success? Reliability. Does it produce consistent results? And fairness. Is it free from bias against protected groups? Furthermore, it requires understanding the specific skills and competencies the role demands and selecting a test that directly assesses these. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring a data-driven, objective, and legally defensible selection process, minimizing the risk of discriminatory hiring and maximizing the likelihood of identifying suitable candidates. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves selecting a test based solely on its widespread popularity or the recommendation of a single colleague. This fails to account for the specific needs of the role and the test's actual predictive validity for that particular context. It represents a regulatory and ethical failure by potentially leading to the use of an inappropriate or biased assessment tool, which could result in unfair hiring practices and potential legal repercussions under employment law that prohibits discrimination. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize a test that is quick and inexpensive to administer, without adequately assessing its psychometric properties or relevance to the job. It prioritizes cost efficiency over effectiveness and fairness. This approach risks selecting a test that does not accurately measure the required aptitudes, leading to poor hiring decisions and potentially violating ethical obligations to conduct a thorough and fair assessment. It also fails to meet the implicit regulatory expectation of due diligence in the hiring process. A third incorrect approach is to rely on a test that has not been updated or validated for a significant period. Outdated tests may not reflect current job demands or may contain biases that have since been identified and addressed in more modern assessments. This represents a failure to adhere to professional standards of using current and validated assessment tools, which could lead to discriminatory outcomes, and a breach of ethical responsibilities to ensure fairness and equity in the selection process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach aptitude test selection by first clearly defining the essential skills and competencies for the role. This should be followed by researching and evaluating potential tests based on their documented validity, reliability, and fairness. A comparative analysis of the most suitable options, considering the specific context of the organization and the role, is crucial. Seeking expert advice and ensuring the chosen test aligns with relevant employment legislation and ethical guidelines are also vital steps in a robust and defensible decision-making process. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a financial advisory firm needs to hire individuals who can not only understand complex market dynamics, but also demonstrate a high degree of ethical conduct and client centricity. Which of the following assessment strategies would best align with these requirements for a comprehensive evaluation of candidates? Option A. A battery of tests including a measure of abstract reasoning, a situational judgment test assessing ethical dilemmas, and a personality inventory focusing on conscientiousness and agreeableness. Option B. A test solely focused on identifying candidates with extensive prior experience in financial markets, regardless of their cognitive or behavioral profiles. Option C. A single test that measures the speed at which candidates can process basic numerical data. Option D. A personality questionnaire that prioritizes identifying candidates who are highly assertive and competitive. The correct answer is A. A battery of tests including a measure of abstract reasoning, a situational judgment test assessing ethical dilemmas, and a personality inventory focusing on conscientiousness and agreeableness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting the most appropriate aptitude test for a critical role where both cognitive ability and behavioral tendencies are paramount. The challenge lies in the nuanced differences between tests designed to measure inherent potential versus those assessing learned skills or ingrained behaviors. A misdiagnosis of an individual's capabilities or suitability can lead to significant operational inefficiencies, increased risk of misconduct, and potential regulatory breaches if unqualified individuals are placed in positions of trust. Careful judgment is required to align the test's purpose with the specific demands of the role and the desired outcomes of the assessment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on a comprehensive assessment that considers both the candidate's innate cognitive abilities, aptitude, and their likely behavioral responses in a professional setting, behavioral assessment. This aligns with best professional practice by providing a holistic view of the candidate's potential fit for the role. Regulatory frameworks, while not explicitly detailed here as no specific jurisdiction is provided, generally emphasize fair and effective selection processes that minimize bias and ensure suitability for the responsibilities undertaken. A combined approach is ethically sound, as it seeks to identify individuals who are not only capable, but also likely to act with integrity and professionalism, thereby safeguarding the organization and its stakeholders. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach relies solely on a test measuring learned skills. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to assess the underlying cognitive capacity or potential for adaptation, which are crucial for roles requiring problem-solving and learning. It may inadvertently favor candidates with specific prior training over those with higher inherent potential who could be more adaptable. Ethically, this approach could lead to discrimination against individuals from less privileged backgrounds who may not have had access to the same training opportunities, even if they possess superior aptitude. Another incorrect approach focuses exclusively on personality traits without considering cognitive ability. This is professionally flawed as it overlooks the fundamental requirement for individuals to possess the mental capacity to understand complex information, make sound judgments, and perform the core duties of the role. Relying only on personality might identify agreeable individuals, but not necessarily competent ones. Regulatory concerns could arise if this leads to the selection of individuals who are personable but lack the necessary skills or understanding to operate within compliance frameworks, potentially increasing operational risk. A third incorrect approach uses a test that measures only speed of response. This is professionally inadequate as it prioritizes superficial quickness over accuracy, critical thinking, or depth of understanding. While speed can be a factor in some roles, it is rarely the sole determinant of suitability. This approach risks overlooking candidates who are more thoughtful and accurate but slower, potentially leading to selection of individuals prone to errors or superficial decision-making, which could have serious compliance and operational consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough job analysis to identify the critical competencies, skills, and behavioral attributes required for the role. This is followed by a careful selection of assessment tools that are validated for measuring these specific attributes. A multifaceted approach, combining different types of aptitude and behavioral assessments, is often the most robust. Professionals must also consider the ethical implications of their choices, ensuring fairness, objectivity, and a commitment to selecting individuals who will uphold professional standards and regulatory requirements. Continuous evaluation of assessment outcomes and their correlation with job performance is also a key component of best practice. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that for a critical role requiring both sharp analytical skills and a strong ethical compass, a firm is considering several aptitude testing strategies. Which strategy best aligns with the principles of comprehensive and fair candidate assessment? Option A. Prioritizing tests that exclusively measure abstract reasoning and problem-solving abilities, assuming ethical behavior is a secondary concern. Option B. Employing a combination of validated cognitive ability tests and assessments specifically designed to evaluate ethical judgment and decision-making, ensuring the tests are relevant to the role's responsibilities. Option C. Selecting the most widely recognized aptitude test available, regardless of its specific focus or proven correlation with ethical conduct in similar roles. Option D. Relying primarily on informal interviews and personal references to gauge a candidate's ethical standing, supplemented by a general intelligence test. Correct answer is A. Prioritizing tests that exclusively measure abstract reasoning and problem-solving abilities, assuming ethical behavior is a secondary concern. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting an appropriate aptitude test for a critical role where both cognitive ability and ethical judgment are paramount. The difficulty lies in balancing the need for objective measurement of skills with the inherent subjectivity and potential biases within different testing methodologies. A misjudgment can lead to the selection of unsuitable candidates, impacting team performance, compliance, and the firm's reputation. Careful consideration of the test's design, validation, and relevance to the specific job functions is crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comparative analysis of aptitude tests that specifically assess both logical reasoning and ethical decision-making capabilities. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring a holistic evaluation of a candidate's suitability for a role that demands both intellectual acumen and integrity. Regulatory frameworks, while not explicitly detailed here for a general aptitude test exam, generally emphasize fairness, validity, and reliability in selection processes. An approach that considers tests validated for predicting job performance and ethical conduct, and which minimizes bias, is ethically sound and professionally responsible. This ensures that the selection process is not only effective but also equitable. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on tests that measure abstract reasoning or numerical ability without considering the ethical dimension. This fails to address the full spectrum of requirements for a role where integrity is critical. Ethically, this could lead to the selection of individuals who are intellectually capable but lack the moral compass necessary for responsible conduct, potentially exposing the firm to compliance breaches or reputational damage. From a professional standpoint, it represents an incomplete assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on subjective assessments or informal interviews as the primary method for evaluating ethical judgment, while using a generic cognitive aptitude test. This is professionally unsound because it lacks the objectivity and standardization required for fair and reliable candidate evaluation. Regulatory guidelines for selection processes typically mandate the use of validated and objective measures. Relying on subjective methods introduces significant bias and can lead to discriminatory hiring practices, which are ethically and often legally unacceptable. A third incorrect approach would be to select a test based solely on its popularity or ease of administration, without verifying its psychometric properties or its relevance to the specific job role. This is a failure of due diligence. Professionally, it demonstrates a lack of rigor in the selection process. Ethically, it can result in the exclusion of qualified candidates or the selection of unsuitable ones, undermining the principles of fairness and meritocracy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach candidate selection by first clearly defining the essential competencies and attributes required for the role, including both technical skills and behavioral characteristics like integrity. They should then research and evaluate available aptitude tests based on their validity, reliability, fairness, and relevance to the specific job. A multifaceted approach, combining different types of assessments where appropriate, is often best. Professionals must also be aware of and adhere to any relevant guidelines or regulations concerning fair employment practices and the use of selection tools. When in doubt, consulting with HR professionals or psychometric experts is advisable. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a nuanced approach to candidate selection, particularly when assessing individuals for roles demanding strong analytical and problem-solving capabilities. Considering the need to evaluate these skills without relying on purely mathematical assessments, which of the following methods would best align with professional best practices for aptitude testing? Option A. Selecting a widely recognized general aptitude test that has not been specifically validated for the particular role or industry. Option B. Employing a battery of tests that assess logical reasoning, critical thinking, and situational judgment through scenario-based questions and abstract problem-solving exercises that do not require specific mathematical knowledge. Option C. Administering a comprehensive series of advanced mathematical aptitude tests, assuming that strong numerical skills are a direct proxy for all forms of analytical ability. Option D. Utilizing personality inventories and behavioral questionnaires as the primary means to gauge a candidate's problem-solving potential. The correct answer is B. Employing a battery of tests that assess logical reasoning, critical thinking, and situational judgment through scenario-based questions and abstract problem-solving exercises that do not require specific mathematical knowledge. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to discern the most effective method for assessing a candidate's suitability for a role that demands strong analytical and problem-solving skills, without resorting to purely mathematical evaluations. The challenge lies in selecting an aptitude test that accurately reflects these cognitive abilities in a practical, non-numerical context, ensuring fairness and relevance to the job's demands. Careful judgment is required to avoid tests that might inadvertently favor certain backgrounds or penalize candidates for a lack of specific mathematical training, thereby compromising the integrity of the selection process. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic assessment of cognitive abilities directly relevant to the role. By focusing on tests that evaluate logical reasoning, critical thinking, and problem-solving in a qualitative or scenario-based manner, it ensures that candidates are evaluated on their inherent capacity to analyze situations and devise solutions, rather than on their mastery of specific mathematical formulas or calculations. This aligns with the ethical principle of fair assessment and the professional guideline of selecting assessment tools that have demonstrable validity and reliability for the specific job requirements, as often emphasized in professional aptitude testing frameworks. An incorrect approach that relies solely on numerical reasoning tests would fail to capture the full spectrum of analytical skills needed for many roles. This represents a regulatory and ethical failure because it could lead to the exclusion of highly capable candidates who excel in qualitative analysis, but may not perform as well on abstract numerical problems. Such a narrow focus can also be seen as a failure to adhere to best practices in psychometric assessment, which advocate for multifaceted evaluation. Another incorrect approach, such as using personality inventories as a primary measure of aptitude, would be a significant professional and ethical misstep. Personality tests assess behavioral tendencies and preferences, not cognitive abilities like problem-solving or logical deduction. Relying on them for aptitude assessment would be a direct violation of the purpose of aptitude testing and could lead to misinformed hiring decisions, potentially violating guidelines related to the validity and appropriateness of assessment tools. Finally, an approach that uses a generic, unvalidated aptitude test without considering its relevance to the specific role is professionally unsound. This could lead to a failure to accurately predict job performance and may not meet regulatory standards for fair and equitable assessment. It represents a lack of due diligence in the selection process, potentially leading to discriminatory outcomes if the test is not demonstrably job-related. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough job analysis to identify the core cognitive skills required. Subsequently, professionals should research and select aptitude tests that are specifically designed to measure these skills, prioritizing those with proven validity and reliability. A comparative analysis of different test types, considering their strengths and limitations in relation to the job requirements, is crucial. The ultimate goal is to employ assessment methods that are fair, relevant, and predictive of successful job performance, adhering to ethical guidelines and professional standards for assessment. Question 9. The audit findings indicate that the firm has been utilizing a standardized battery of general aptitude tests for all new hires across various departments, including those in highly regulated functions, without conducting specific validation studies to correlate test scores with on-the-job performance in those critical roles. Which of the following approaches best addresses this finding from a regulatory compliance and professional best practice perspective? Option A. Continue using the current general aptitude tests as they have been historically employed by the firm, and provide additional on-the-job training to compensate for any potential skill gaps identified during the probationary period. Option B. Implement a program to validate the existing general aptitude tests against specific job performance metrics for each regulated role, and if validation is not achieved, explore alternative assessment methods that are demonstrably job-relevant and compliant with regulatory expectations for assessing competence. Option C. Focus on the cost-effectiveness of the current testing process and seek to expand its use to other areas of the business, while documenting the firm's historical reliance on these tests as evidence of due diligence. Option D. Commission a review of the general aptitude tests to confirm their broad psychometric soundness and rely on the reputation of the test providers, assuming their general validity is sufficient for all roles. Correct answer is B. Implement a program to validate the existing general aptitude tests against specific job performance metrics for each regulated role, and if validation is not achieved, explore alternative assessment methods that are demonstrably job-relevant and compliant with regulatory expectations for assessing competence. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential disconnect between the stated purpose of aptitude tests and their actual application within a regulated environment. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of how assessment tools, designed for general ability measurement, must be adapted and validated to meet specific regulatory requirements for personnel suitability. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the aptitude tests are not only measuring inherent skills, but are also demonstrably predictive of job performance in a way that aligns with regulatory expectations for competence and fitness. Careful judgment is required to balance the general nature of aptitude testing with the specific, often stringent, demands of regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the validation of aptitude tests against specific job roles and regulatory standards. This ensures that the tests are not merely measuring abstract abilities, but are demonstrably linked to the competencies required for safe and effective performance within the regulated industry. This aligns with the ethical obligation to ensure that individuals are properly assessed for roles that have a direct impact on public safety, financial markets, or other areas governed by strict regulations. Such validation provides objective evidence that the assessment process is fair, reliable, and relevant, thereby meeting the spirit and letter of regulatory frameworks that mandate competence and suitability. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the general validity of aptitude tests without specific job-related validation fails to meet regulatory expectations. This is a regulatory failure because it assumes that a general measure of ability is sufficient for a specific role, ignoring the need for evidence that the tested abilities translate into required job performance. Ethically, this is problematic as it could lead to the placement of individuals who possess general aptitude but lack the specific skills or knowledge necessary for the role, potentially compromising safety or market integrity. Another incorrect approach that focuses on the cost-effectiveness of readily available, off-the-shelf aptitude tests without considering their suitability for the regulated environment represents a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. This prioritizes expediency over due diligence, failing to ensure that the tests are appropriate for the specific context and the regulatory requirements for assessing competence. This can lead to a situation where individuals are deemed suitable based on irrelevant or poorly matched assessments, creating a risk to the regulated entity and the public. A third incorrect approach that emphasizes the historical use of certain aptitude tests within the organization, regardless of current regulatory changes or evolving job requirements, is also professionally unsound. This represents a failure to adapt to changing standards and a lack of proactive risk management. Regulatory frameworks are dynamic, and relying on outdated assessment practices, even if they were once acceptable, can lead to non-compliance and a failure to maintain the highest standards of personnel suitability. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the specific regulatory requirements for personnel suitability and competence in the relevant jurisdiction. 2. Identify the critical competencies and skills required for each role within the regulated environment. 3. Evaluate potential aptitude tests based on their alignment with these specific competencies and their demonstrated predictive validity for the roles in question. 4. Conduct or commission validation studies to ensure that the chosen tests accurately measure the required abilities and are predictive of successful job performance within the regulated context. 5. Regularly review and update assessment strategies to ensure ongoing compliance with evolving regulations and industry best practices. Question 10. Operational review demonstrates that a recently administered aptitude test for a critical role has yielded a statistically significant disparity in scores between different demographic groups. While the test is designed to measure problem-solving and logical reasoning skills, there is a concern that certain question phrasing or contextual examples might inadvertently favor candidates with specific cultural backgrounds or prior exposure to particular types of scenarios, thereby potentially compromising the test's objectivity and fairness. What is the most appropriate course of action to address this situation? Option A. Rely on the test provider's standard validation reports and assume the disparity is due to inherent differences in candidate abilities rather than a flaw in the test itself. Option B. Immediately discontinue the use of the test and seek an entirely new assessment tool without further investigation into the current test's specific shortcomings. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the test content, administration procedures, and scoring to identify any elements that may contribute to differential performance across demographic groups, and consult with psychometric experts if necessary to ensure the test remains a valid and unbiased measure of the required skills. Option D. Adjust the scoring thresholds for the affected demographic groups to achieve a more equitable representation in the selection outcomes. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the test content, administration procedures, and scoring to identify any elements that may contribute to differential performance across demographic groups, and consult with psychometric experts if necessary to ensure the test remains a valid and unbiased measure of the required skills. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in ensuring the integrity and fairness of an aptitude testing process within a regulated environment. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient candidate selection with the ethical and regulatory imperative to avoid bias and ensure that tests accurately measure the intended skills without being influenced by external factors. The professional must exercise careful judgment to uphold these standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the test design and administration to identify potential sources of bias. This includes scrutinizing the content for cultural relevance, ensuring clear instructions, and verifying that the testing environment is standardized. This aligns with the general principles of aptitude testing, which aim for objective measurement of inherent abilities or learned skills relevant to a role. In a regulated context, this proactive approach is essential for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with any overarching guidelines that mandate fair and equitable assessment practices, even if specific regulations for aptitude tests are not explicitly detailed in the Aptitude Tests General term for various tests that measure specific abilities or skills framework. The focus is on the inherent fairness and validity of the assessment tool itself. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss concerns about potential bias without a thorough investigation. This fails to uphold the principle of fairness inherent in aptitude testing and could lead to discriminatory practices, even if unintentional. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of commitment to providing equal opportunity. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the test provider's assurances of validity and reliability without independent verification. This abdicates professional responsibility and could perpetuate flawed testing methodologies. It risks non-compliance with any implied or explicit requirement for due diligence in selecting assessment tools. A third incorrect approach would be to modify test questions or scoring criteria based on initial candidate performance trends without a clear, objective rationale. This introduces subjectivity and undermines the standardized nature of aptitude tests potentially leading to unfair outcomes and violating the principle of consistent application of assessment standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes objective assessment, fairness, and continuous improvement. This involves understanding the purpose of the aptitude test, critically evaluating its design and implementation, and being prepared to investigate and address any identified issues. When faced with potential bias, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging the concern. 2. Initiating an objective review of the testing process and materials. 3. Consulting relevant guidelines or best practices for aptitude testing. 4. Implementing evidence-based adjustments if necessary. 5. Documenting all steps taken. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that a key aspect of professional development involves understanding the appropriate application of assessment tools. When considering the use of aptitude tests for evaluating candidates for roles requiring problem-solving and critical thinking skills, which of the following best reflects the intended purpose and professional application of such tests? Option A. Identify individuals who demonstrate a strong capacity for logical reasoning and analytical thinking, suggesting potential for success in roles demanding these cognitive abilities. Option B. To measure a candidate's current level of expertise and accumulated knowledge in a specific subject area, irrespective of their underlying cognitive potential. Option C. To serve as the sole determinant of a candidate's suitability for a role, overriding all other forms of assessment and personal attributes. Option D. To gauge a candidate's immediate emotional state and stress tolerance during the testing period, as this is considered the primary factor for job performance. The correct answer is A. To identify individuals who demonstrate a strong capacity for logical reasoning and analytical thinking, suggesting potential for success in roles demanding these cognitive abilities. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret and apply the principles of aptitude testing within a specific, albeit general, regulatory context. Aptitude Tests General term for various tests that measure specific abilities or skills. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of aptitude tests to a deeper appreciation of their purpose and limitations in a professional setting, particularly when considering their role in assessing suitability for roles that require specific cognitive abilities. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misinterpretation or misuse of test results, which could lead to unfair selection processes or the overlooking of qualified candidates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on understanding the fundamental purpose of aptitude tests as tools to measure inherent abilities or learned proficiencies relevant to a specific task or role. This aligns with the general understanding of aptitude tests as diagnostic instruments designed to predict future performance. Best professional practice dictates using these tests to identify individuals who possess the foundational cognitive skills necessary for success, rather than as a sole determinant of suitability. This approach is ethically sound as it aims for objective assessment and fair opportunity, preventing bias that might arise from subjective evaluations alone. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach might involve viewing aptitude tests solely as a measure of current knowledge or a definitive predictor of success without considering other factors. This fails to acknowledge that aptitude tests are designed to assess potential and underlying abilities, not necessarily acquired knowledge or experience. Ethically, this can lead to discrimination against individuals who may have strong potential but lack specific, testable knowledge at the moment of assessment. Another incorrect approach could be to dismiss aptitude tests entirely, arguing they are too subjective or prone to error. While tests have limitations, a complete disregard for them ignores their established utility in identifying specific cognitive strengths and weaknesses relevant to a role. This approach can be professionally unsound, as it forgoes a valuable tool for objective assessment, potentially leading to reliance on less reliable subjective judgments and missing opportunities to identify candidates with demonstrable aptitudes. A third incorrect approach might be to use aptitude test results in isolation, without considering the broader context of a candidate's experience, qualifications, and performance in other assessment methods. Aptitude tests are typically one component of a comprehensive assessment strategy. Relying solely on them can lead to a narrow and potentially inaccurate view of a candidate's overall suitability. This is ethically problematic as it can result in unfair exclusion of candidates who might excel in other areas crucial for the role. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach aptitude testing by first understanding the specific abilities the test is designed to measure and how these relate to the requirements of the role. They should then consider the test as one piece of a larger assessment puzzle, integrating its results with other forms of evaluation. This involves a critical assessment of the test's validity and reliability for the intended purpose, and a commitment to using the results ethically and fairly, ensuring that all candidates are given a comprehensive and equitable evaluation. Question 12. Comparative studies suggest that the effectiveness of aptitude tests in predicting job performance can vary significantly depending on the specific role. For a position requiring sophisticated judgment in identifying and mitigating complex financial risks, which approach to selecting an aptitude test would be most professionally sound? Option A. Choosing a test that assesses a candidate's general cognitive ability or IQ, assuming higher intelligence correlates with better risk assessment skills. Option B. Prioritizing a test that measures a candidate's knowledge of specific financial products or regulatory compliance, as this indicates familiarity with the financial environment. Option C. Selecting a test that measures a candidate's ability to analyze complex scenarios, identify potential threats, and make reasoned decisions under conditions of uncertainty. Option D. Opting for a test that evaluates a candidate's personality traits and behavioral preferences, as these can influence risk-taking behavior. Correct answer is C. Selecting a test that measures a candidate's ability to analyze complex scenarios, identify potential threats, and make reasoned decisions under conditions of uncertainty. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting an appropriate aptitude test for a critical role where judgment and risk assessment are paramount. The challenge lies in identifying a test that accurately measures the specific cognitive abilities required for effective risk assessment, rather than general intelligence or a broad range of skills. Misjudging the test's suitability could lead to hiring individuals who lack the nuanced judgment necessary to navigate complex financial risks, potentially resulting in significant financial losses or regulatory breaches. The pressure to fill a role quickly can exacerbate this challenge, tempting a less rigorous selection process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves selecting an aptitude test specifically designed to evaluate a candidate's ability to analyze complex information, identify potential risks, and make reasoned judgments under uncertainty. This aligns with the core competencies required for effective risk assessment. Such tests often focus on logical reasoning, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills as applied to scenarios involving potential negative outcomes. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly targets the essential skills for the role, minimizing the risk of a poor hiring decision. It is ethically sound as it aims to place the most competent individuals in positions of responsibility, thereby protecting the firm and its clients. While no specific regulatory framework for aptitude test selection in general aptitude tests is provided for this exam, the underlying principle of due diligence and ensuring competence for a role is a universal professional standard. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to select a general intelligence test. While general intelligence is a foundational cognitive ability, it does not specifically measure the nuanced skills required for risk assessment, such as the ability to identify subtle warning signs, weigh probabilities of adverse events, or understand the cascading effects of risk. Relying solely on a general intelligence score could lead to overlooking candidates with strong risk assessment aptitude, but who may not score exceptionally high on broad cognitive measures. This is professionally unsound, as it fails to adequately assess the specific requirements of the role. Another incorrect approach is to choose a test that measures personality traits or behavioral styles without a direct link to risk assessment capabilities. While personality can influence how an individual approaches risk, a personality test alone cannot determine a candidate's ability to perform the analytical and judgmental tasks of risk assessment. This approach is flawed because it assesses disposition rather than demonstrable cognitive skill, potentially leading to a mismatch between the candidate's profile and the job's demands. A third incorrect approach is to opt for a test that focuses on technical knowledge or specific job skills unrelated to the core competencies of risk assessment. For instance, a test on a particular software or a specific financial product might be relevant for other roles, but it would not effectively measure a candidate's aptitude for identifying, analyzing, and mitigating broader financial risks. This is a failure of professional judgment, as it prioritizes irrelevant skills over the critical ones needed for the position. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the selection of aptitude tests with a clear understanding of the specific competencies required for the role. This involves 1. Defining the core skills and abilities needed for the position, particularly those related to judgment and risk assessment. 2. Researching and evaluating different types of aptitude tests to identify those that have been validated for measuring these specific competencies. 3. Considering the context of the role and the potential impact of errors in judgment. 4. Prioritizing tests that offer a direct measure of the required cognitive functions over general aptitude or unrelated skills. 5. Ensuring that the chosen test is administered and interpreted by qualified personnel. Question 13. Assessment of a candidate's suitability for a role requiring strong analytical and problem-solving skills should prioritize methods that demonstrate practical application of these abilities in realistic scenarios, rather than relying on a single standardized cognitive test or solely on past academic performance. Which of the following approaches best aligns with this principle for a fair and effective evaluation? Option A. Administering a widely recognized general aptitude test that measures abstract reasoning and numerical ability as the primary selection tool. Option B. Conducting unstructured interviews where candidates are asked open-ended questions about their general work experience and personal attributes. Option C. Evaluating candidates based exclusively on their final academic transcripts and the reputation of their educational institutions. Option D. Utilizing a combination of practical case studies, situational judgment exercises, and structured interviews with predefined scoring criteria to assess problem-solving processes and decision-making. The correct answer is D. Utilizing a combination of practical case studies, situational judgment exercises, and structured interviews with predefined scoring criteria to assess problem-solving processes and decision-making. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in accurately assessing an individual's potential for a role that requires strong analytical and problem-solving skills, without relying on traditional, potentially biased, or overly narrow aptitude tests. The professional challenge lies in identifying a comprehensive and fair method that truly reflects the candidate's capabilities and suitability for the demands of the role, while adhering to principles of equal opportunity and avoiding discriminatory practices. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a multifaceted assessment that moves beyond a single, standardized test. It focuses on evaluating a candidate's ability to apply their knowledge and skills in practical, real-world scenarios. This aligns with best professional practice by seeking to understand how a candidate thinks, reasons, and solves problems in contexts relevant to the job. This approach is ethically sound, as it aims for a more holistic and equitable evaluation, reducing the risk of overlooking qualified candidates who may not perform well under the pressure of a single, high-stakes test. It also reflects a commitment to assessing actual job performance potential rather than just abstract cognitive abilities. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach relies solely on a single, standardized aptitude test. This is professionally unacceptable because such tests can be culturally biased, may not accurately reflect an individual's true problem-solving capabilities in a work context, and can disproportionately disadvantage certain groups. Ethically, it fails to provide a fair and equitable assessment. Another incorrect approach focuses exclusively on past academic achievements. While academic success can be an indicator, it does not guarantee practical application of skills or the ability to adapt to new challenges. This approach is professionally weak, as it overlooks crucial competencies like adaptability, critical thinking in novel situations, and practical problem-solving, which are often not fully captured by academic records. It also risks perpetuating biases if past academic opportunities were not equally distributed. A third incorrect approach prioritizes subjective interviews without structured evaluation criteria. This is professionally problematic due to the high potential for interviewer bias, leading to inconsistent and unfair evaluations. It fails to provide objective evidence of a candidate's aptitude and can be influenced by factors unrelated to job performance, such as likability or communication style, rather than core analytical skills. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that involves defining the core competencies required for the role, designing assessment methods that directly measure these competencies, and ensuring these methods are fair, objective, and inclusive. This involves using a combination of assessment tools, including practical exercises, situational judgment tests, and structured interviews with clear scoring rubrics to build a comprehensive picture of a candidate's aptitude and potential. Regular review and validation of assessment methods are crucial to ensure their continued effectiveness and fairness. Question 14. When evaluating aptitude tests for a critical role, which approach best ensures a fair and effective selection process? Option A. Selecting a test that has been widely adopted by other organizations in the industry, assuming its general applicability. Option B. Conducting a thorough review of the test's psychometric properties, including its validity and reliability for the specific role, and considering its potential for adverse impact. Option C. Relying on the recommendations of a single, well-respected industry expert without independent verification of the test's suitability. Option D. Prioritizing a test that is known for its speed of administration and ease of scoring to expedite the hiring timeline. The correct answer is A. Selecting a test that has been widely adopted by other organizations in the industry, assuming its general applicability. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting an appropriate aptitude test for a critical role. The challenge lies in balancing the need for a comprehensive assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, while ensuring the chosen test is valid, reliable, and ethically administered. Misjudging the test's suitability can lead to poor hiring decisions, wasted investment, and potential legal or reputational damage if the test is found to be discriminatory or ineffective. Careful judgment is required to align the assessment methodology with the specific demands of the role and the organization's objectives. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the test's psychometric properties, including its validity. Does it measure what it claims to measure in relation to job performance? And reliability. Does it produce consistent results? This approach aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing evidence-based selection methods. It ensures that the assessment is a fair and accurate predictor of future job success, minimizing the risk of bias and maximizing the likelihood of a good hire. This adheres to ethical guidelines for assessment, which mandate the use of validated tools and fair selection processes. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that prioritizes a test solely based on its widespread popularity or the perceived ease of administration is professionally unacceptable. This fails to consider the specific requirements of the role and the psychometric soundness of the test, potentially leading to the selection of an inappropriate tool. Ethically, it bypasses the due diligence required to ensure fairness and validity. Another incorrect approach is to select a test based on anecdotal evidence or personal preference without objective validation. This introduces subjectivity and bias into the selection process, undermining the scientific basis of aptitude testing. It violates professional standards that require objective, data-driven decision-making. Finally, choosing a test that is known to have potential adverse impact on certain demographic groups without rigorous justification and mitigation strategies is ethically and potentially legally problematic. This demonstrates a failure to consider fairness and equity in the assessment process, which is a fundamental ethical obligation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach to test selection. This involves clearly defining the competencies and skills required for the role, researching available assessment tools, and critically evaluating their psychometric properties, validity, reliability, fairness. Consultation with assessment specialists and a review of relevant professional guidelines are also crucial. The decision should be documented, justifying the choice of test based on its suitability for the specific context and its adherence to ethical principles. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a financial services firm is seeking to recruit new junior analysts. The firm wishes to assess candidates' potential for analytical reasoning and problem-solving skills, crucial for interpreting market data and developing investment strategies. The firm has encountered a situation where a previous hiring round resulted in several analysts struggling with the complexity of the tasks, suggesting a mismatch between candidate aptitude and job requirements. The firm is now evaluating different aptitude testing methodologies to ensure a more effective selection process for this upcoming recruitment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for selecting an aptitude test in this scenario? Option A. Choose a widely advertised and easily accessible online test that claims to measure general intelligence, as this will likely capture a broad spectrum of cognitive abilities applicable to any professional role. Option B. Prioritize a test that is known for its speed of administration and immediate scoring, as this will allow for a rapid assessment of a large pool of applicants, streamlining the hiring process. Option C. Opt for a test recommended by a recruitment agency that specializes in placing candidates for various industries, based on their experience with a high volume of placements. Option D. Select a test that has been empirically validated for predicting performance in similar analytical roles within the financial services industry, focusing on its ability to measure logical deduction and numerical reasoning relevant to financial data interpretation. The correct answer is D. Select a test that has been empirically validated for predicting performance in similar analytical roles within the financial services industry, focusing on its ability to measure logical deduction and numerical reasoning relevant to financial data interpretation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting the most appropriate aptitude test for a specific role. The challenge lies in ensuring the chosen test accurately measures the required skills without introducing bias or failing to capture essential competencies. Misjudging the aptitude test can lead to inefficient hiring, poor performance, and potential legal or ethical repercussions if the test is found to be discriminatory or irrelevant to the job. Careful judgment is required to align the test's psychometric properties with the role's demands and the organization's objectives. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough job analysis to identify the critical skills and abilities required for the role. This analysis then guides the selection of an aptitude test that has been validated for measuring those specific competencies. Best professional practice dictates using tests with established reliability and validity, ensuring they are fair and unbiased across different demographic groups. This approach aligns with ethical hiring practices and regulatory guidelines that promote equal opportunity and prevent discrimination. By focusing on job-relevant criteria, the organization increases the likelihood of hiring suitable candidates and minimizes the risk of legal challenges. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes a test based solely on its popularity or the perceived ease of administration is professionally unacceptable. This fails to ensure the test's relevance to the specific job requirements and may lead to the selection of candidates who perform well on the test but lack the actual skills needed for the role. Ethically, this approach can lead to unfair hiring decisions and potentially discriminatory outcomes if the popular test inadvertently favors certain groups. Another incorrect approach is to select a test that measures a broad range of general cognitive abilities, without a clear link to the specific demands of the role. While general cognitive ability is often important, an overly broad test may not adequately assess the nuanced skills required for a particular position, leading to a poor fit. This can be seen as a failure to conduct due diligence in the selection process, potentially resulting in wasted resources and ineffective hiring. Choosing a test based on anecdotal evidence or the recommendation of a single individual without independent verification of its psychometric properties is also professionally unsound. This approach lacks a systematic, evidence-based foundation and risks employing a test that is unreliable, invalid, or biased. Such a practice can lead to discriminatory hiring and a failure to meet the organization's needs, potentially violating ethical standards and employment laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach to aptitude test selection. This involves 1. Conducting a comprehensive job analysis to define essential skills and abilities. 2. Researching and evaluating available aptitude tests for their reliability, validity, and fairness, ensuring they are job relevant. 3. Considering the practical aspects of test administration and scoring, but only after ensuring psychometric soundness. 4. Documenting the rationale for test selection to ensure transparency and accountability. This structured decision-making process helps mitigate risks, promote fairness, and optimize hiring outcomes. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that selecting the most effective aptitude test for a critical role requires careful consideration of its alignment with job-specific competencies. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional best practice in this selection process? Option A. Rely primarily on a candidate's resume and interview performance to gauge their aptitude, bypassing formal aptitude testing. Option B. Choose the most sophisticated and in-depth aptitude assessment available, regardless of its specific relevance to the role. Option C. Opt for the most widely recognized and frequently used general aptitude test, assuming its broad applicability. Option D. Prioritize selecting an aptitude test that directly measures the core skills and abilities identified as essential in a thorough job analysis for the specific role. The correct answer is D. Prioritize selecting an aptitude test that directly measures the core skills and abilities identified as essential in a thorough job analysis for the specific role. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in selecting the most appropriate aptitude test for a critical role. The challenge lies in balancing the need for a comprehensive assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources, while ensuring the chosen test is valid and reliable for the specific job requirements. Misjudging the aptitude assessment can lead to poor hiring decisions, impacting team performance, project success, and potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny if the selection process is deemed unfair or discriminatory. Careful judgment is required to align the test's purpose with the desired outcomes. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the job description and the specific competencies required for the role. This allows for the identification of an aptitude test that directly measures those critical skills, such as problem solving, critical thinking, or numerical reasoning, as relevant to the position. This targeted selection ensures that the assessment is not only relevant but also efficient, focusing on the most important attributes for success. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing a data-driven, job-relevant selection process, minimizing bias and maximizing the likelihood of a successful hire. It also implicitly adheres to principles of fairness and equal opportunity by assessing candidates on job-related criteria. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves selecting a general-purpose aptitude test without considering the specific demands of the role. This is professionally unacceptable because it may not accurately measure the skills most crucial for success in the position, leading to a potentially misleading assessment of a candidate's suitability. It risks overlooking candidates with specific, relevant aptitudes or favoring those with broader, but less applicable skills. This approach lacks the rigor of a job analysis-driven selection and could be seen as arbitrary. Another incorrect approach is to choose the most complex or comprehensive test available, assuming that more data always equates to better selection. This is professionally flawed as it can be time-consuming and resource-intensive without necessarily yielding more accurate or relevant insights for the specific role. It can also lead to candidate fatigue and a negative candidate experience. Furthermore, an overly complex test might assess skills that are not critical for the job, thus not providing a true measure of aptitude for the role itself. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on a candidate's previous experience or educational background without a standardized aptitude assessment. While experience and education are valuable, they do not always directly correlate with specific aptitudes required for a new role. This approach is professionally weak because it bypasses objective, standardized measurement of key abilities, potentially introducing unconscious bias and failing to identify candidates who may possess the necessary aptitudes but lack the specific prior experience. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to aptitude test selection. This begins with a detailed job analysis to identify essential skills and competencies. Subsequently, research and evaluate available aptitude tests, prioritizing those with proven validity and reliability for assessing the identified skills. Consider the practical aspects such as administration time, cost, and candidate experience. Finally, ensure the chosen test aligns with ethical guidelines and regulatory requirements for fair and non-discriminatory hiring practices. Question 17. Upon reviewing the need to implement aptitude testing for a range of roles within an organization, from entry-level customer service to specialized technical positions, what is the most professionally sound approach to selecting and utilizing these assessments? Option A. Implement a single, comprehensive aptitude assessment that covers a wide array of cognitive abilities, believing it will provide sufficient insight for all candidate evaluations. Option B. Prioritize the selection of tests that have been recently developed and are marketed as innovative, assuming they will be effective for all positions. Option C. Conduct thorough research to identify aptitude tests specifically validated for measuring the core competencies and skills required for each distinct role, ensuring alignment with job requirements and ethical assessment principles. Option D. Select a widely recognized general aptitude test that is known for its ease of administration and broad applicability across different job families. The correct answer is C. Conduct thorough research to identify aptitude tests specifically validated for measuring the core competencies and skills required for each distinct role, ensuring alignment with job requirements and ethical assessment principles. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret and apply the principles of aptitude testing in a context where the specific purpose and desired outcomes are not clearly defined. The ambiguity surrounding the general term nature of aptitude tests necessitates careful consideration of how to select and implement such assessments effectively and ethically, ensuring they align with the organization's objectives without introducing bias or unfairness. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic process of defining the specific skills and abilities relevant to the roles in question, and then identifying aptitude tests that have been validated to measure those specific attributes. This ensures that the assessment is targeted, relevant, and provides meaningful data for selection or development. It aligns with best practices in psychometric assessment, which emphasize validity, measuring what it claims to measure, and reliability, consistency of measurement. Ethically, this approach promotes fairness by focusing on job-related competencies rather than arbitrary or potentially discriminatory factors. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves selecting tests based solely on their perceived popularity or the ease with which they can be administered. This fails to address the core requirement of measuring relevant aptitudes and risks, using assessments that are not valid for the intended purpose. It can lead to poor hiring decisions and may inadvertently introduce bias if popular tests are not universally applicable or have inherent cultural biases. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any test labeled as an aptitude test will be suitable without further investigation. This overlooks the critical need for validation and evidence of psychometric soundness. Without such due diligence, the organization may be using assessments that are unreliable, invalid, or even discriminatory, leading to ethical breaches and legal challenges. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of implementation over thoroughness, perhaps by using a generic, one-size-fits-all aptitude test for all positions. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of how aptitude tests should be tailored to specific job requirements and can result in misidentification of talent or the exclusion of suitable candidates. It is professionally unsound as it fails to meet the fundamental requirement of a relevant and effective assessment process. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with implementing aptitude tests should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach. This begins with a clear definition of the competencies required for the role. Subsequently, research and evaluation of available aptitude tests should focus on their psychometric properties, including validity and reliability, and their alignment with the defined competencies. Consultation with psychometric experts or review of professional guidelines for test selection is advisable. The process should prioritize fairness, objectivity, and the generation of actionable insights that support informed decision-making. Question 18. During the evaluation of candidates for a critical role requiring strong problem-solving and analytical skills, a standardized aptitude test is administered. One candidate scores exceptionally high on the quantitative reasoning section, but only moderately on the verbal reasoning section. The hiring manager is particularly impressed by the quantitative score, believing it directly correlates with the candidate's ability to handle complex data analysis, a key aspect of the role. However, the candidate's resume and interview performance suggests strong communication skills and a solid understanding of the qualitative aspects of the role. What is the most professionally sound approach to incorporating these aptitude test results into the hiring decision? Option A. Consider the aptitude test results as one component of a comprehensive evaluation, weighing the verbal reasoning score alongside the candidate's demonstrated experience, interview performance, and other relevant qualifications to make a holistic decision. Option B. Adjust the verbal reasoning score upwards to better align with the candidate's strong interview performance, thereby presenting a more balanced overall aptitude profile. Option C. Disregard the aptitude test results entirely, as the candidate's resume and interview performance already indicate strong potential, and focus solely on these qualitative assessments. Option D. Prioritize the high quantitative reasoning score as the primary indicator of the candidate's suitability for the role, given the emphasis on data analysis, and proceed with the candidate assuming their verbal skills will develop on the job. The correct answer is A. Consider the aptitude test results as one component of a comprehensive evaluation, weighing the verbal reasoning score alongside the candidate's demonstrated experience, interview performance, and other relevant qualifications to make a holistic decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in interpreting and applying aptitude test results within a regulatory context. The challenge lies in balancing the need for objective assessment with the potential for bias or misinterpretation, and ensuring that the use of these tests aligns with fair employment practices and any relevant guidelines governing their application. The professional must exercise careful judgment to avoid discriminatory outcomes or the misuse of assessment data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a holistic review of the aptitude test results in conjunction with other relevant information, such as the candidate's experience, qualifications, and performance in other assessment stages. This aligns with best professional practice by recognizing that aptitude tests are one tool among many for evaluating a candidate. Regulatory and ethical guidelines generally advocate for a multifaceted assessment process that avoids over-reliance on a single data point, thereby promoting fairness and reducing the risk of adverse impact on protected groups. This approach ensures that the test is used as intended to identify potential rather than as a definitive judgment of suitability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the aptitude test score as the definitive factor for selection. This fails to acknowledge the inherent limitations of any single assessment tool and can lead to the exclusion of potentially strong candidates who may not perform optimally under test conditions or whose strengths lie in areas not fully captured by the test. Ethically, this can be seen as unfair and potentially discriminatory if the test has not been validated for the specific role, or if it disproportionately screens out certain demographic groups without a clear business necessity. Another incorrect approach is to disregard the aptitude test results entirely, even if they indicate a significant deficiency in a critical skill area relevant to the role. This can lead to the selection of candidates who may lack the fundamental abilities required to perform the job effectively, potentially impacting productivity and increasing the risk of errors. From a professional standpoint, ignoring relevant data without a valid reason can be seen as negligent and may contravene organizational policies or industry best practices that mandate a thorough evaluation process. A further incorrect approach is to adjust the aptitude test scores based on subjective factors or perceived candidate characteristics. This introduces bias into the evaluation process and undermines the objectivity that aptitude tests are intended to provide. Such manipulation is ethically unsound and can lead to accusations of unfairness or discrimination, potentially violating employment laws and regulations that require objective and consistent evaluation criteria. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the interpretation of aptitude test results by first understanding the purpose and limitations of the specific test being used. They should then consider the test results within the broader context of the candidate's overall profile, including their experience, education, and performance in other assessment components. This integrated approach ensures a comprehensive and fair evaluation. If test results raise concern, further investigation or alternative assessment methods may be warranted. Professionals must always adhere to ethical guidelines and relevant regulations concerning the fair and non-discriminatory use of assessment tools. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that a candidate's aptitude test results are being reviewed for a critical role. The reviewer is considering whether to prioritize the candidate's overall score, focus on specific subscores relevant to key job functions, or allow personal observations about the candidate's demeanor during the assessment to heavily influence the final interpretation. Which approach best aligns with professional standards for interpreting aptitude test results in a selection context? Option A. Dismissing the test results if they do not immediately confirm pre-existing positive or negative assumptions about the candidate's capabilities. Option B. allowing personal impressions and anecdotal evidence about the candidate to override the objective data presented by the aptitude test. Option C, giving significant weight to the candidate's overall score, assuming it is a definitive measure of their suitability for any role. Option D, a comprehensive review that considers the test's validity, the specific demands of the role, and compares the candidate's performance against relevant benchmarks. The correct answer is D, a comprehensive review that considers the test's validity, the specific demands of the role, and compares the candidate's performance against relevant benchmarks. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where an individual is tasked with interpreting the results of an aptitude test, which is a critical component of a selection process. The challenge lies in balancing the objective data from the test with potential subjective biases or external pressures. Misinterpreting or misapplying these results can lead to unfair selection decisions, potentially impacting an individual's career and the effectiveness of the organization. Careful judgment is required to ensure the interpretation is fair, objective, and aligned with the purpose of the aptitude test. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the test's validity and reliability, considering the specific role requirements, and comparing the candidate's performance against established benchmarks or a relevant comparison group. This aligns with best professional practice in psychometric assessment and human resources. It ensures that the interpretation is grounded in evidence and directly relevant to the selection criteria, thereby promoting fairness and objectivity. This approach minimizes the risk of bias and maximizes the likelihood of selecting a candidate who possesses the necessary skills and potential for the role. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the candidate's overall score without considering the specific subscores or the context of the role. This fails to acknowledge that aptitude tests often measure multiple facets of ability, and a candidate might excel in some areas while being average in others. This approach can lead to overlooking a candidate who, despite a moderate overall score, possesses critical strengths essential for the position, or conversely, overemphasizing a strength that is not paramount for the role. This is professionally unacceptable as it lacks nuanced understanding and can result in suboptimal hiring decisions. Another incorrect approach is to allow personal impressions or anecdotal information about the candidate to unduly influence the interpretation of the test results. Aptitude tests are designed to provide objective measures of ability. Allowing subjective factors to override or significantly alter the interpretation of these objective measures introduces bias and undermines the integrity of the assessment process. This is a clear ethical failure, as it deviates from the principle of fair and objective evaluation. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the test results entirely if they do not align with preconceived notions about the candidate's suitability, without a valid psychometric reason. While it is important to consider the overall profile of a candidate, completely disregarding objective data without a justifiable basis is unprofessional. It suggests a lack of trust in the assessment methodology and can lead to decisions based on intuition rather than evidence, potentially missing out on qualified candidates or selecting unsuitable ones. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the interpretation of aptitude test results with a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the purpose and psychometric properties of the test. 2. Clearly defining the requirements of the role being assessed. 3. Analyzing the candidate's performance in relation to both the test's design and the role's demands. 4. Considering the results within the broader context of the candidate's application and other relevant information, while ensuring objectivity. 5. Documenting the interpretation and the rationale behind the conclusions drawn. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are evidence-based, fair, and defensible. Question 20. Consider a scenario where you are administering an aptitude test to a candidate who is visibly distressed and struggling with a particular section. You notice they are repeatedly making the same conceptual error, and you believe a small, targeted hint would help them overcome this hurdle and demonstrate their true potential. However, you are aware that the test instructions strictly prohibit any form of assistance or guidance to candidates during the assessment. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Discreetly provide a subtle hint or clarification on the conceptual error, explaining that it's to help them demonstrate their full capabilities. Option B. Offer to review the specific question with them after the test is completed to explain the correct approach. Option C. Stop the test immediately and inform the candidate that they are not performing well enough and should consider retaking it after further preparation. Option D. Politely inform the candidate that you cannot provide any assistance, but offer them a brief, permitted break if the test guidelines allow, and ensure they are aware of the remaining time. The correct answer is D. Politely inform the candidate that you cannot provide any assistance, but offer them a brief, permitted break if the test guidelines allow, and ensure they are aware of the remaining time. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits the immediate need for a candidate's performance against the integrity of the assessment process and the ethical obligation to ensure fairness. The core conflict lies in balancing the desire to support a candidate who may be struggling with the responsibility to uphold the validity and reliability of aptitude tests, which are designed to measure inherent abilities and potential, not acquired knowledge or coaching. The correct approach, which involves adhering strictly to the test's established protocols and not providing any unauthorized assistance, represents best professional practice because it upholds the fundamental principles of aptitude testing. These tests are intended to provide an objective measure of a candidate's innate cognitive abilities, problem-solving skills, and potential for learning and development. Deviating from the protocol, even with good intentions, compromises the standardization and comparability of results. This ensures that all candidates are assessed under the same conditions, allowing for a fair and equitable comparison of their capabilities. This aligns with the ethical guidelines of professional assessment bodies that emphasize fairness, validity, and reliability in testing. Providing hints or direct assistance to the candidate is professionally unacceptable for several reasons. Firstly, it constitutes a breach of test security and integrity. Aptitude tests are designed to be administered under controlled conditions to prevent any form of unfair advantage. Offering guidance undermines this control and renders the candidate's score meaningless as a true measure of their aptitude. Secondly, it is ethically unsound as it creates an unfair advantage for one candidate over others who have prepared through legitimate means. This violates the principle of equity in assessment. Furthermore, it misrepresents the candidate's actual abilities to the employer or institution, potentially leading to misplacement and future performance issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the purpose and principles of aptitude testing. Professionals must prioritize the integrity of the assessment process and adhere to established guidelines. When faced with a candidate in distress, the appropriate response is to offer support within the boundaries of the test rules, such as ensuring they understand the instructions or have access to necessary, but not test-specific, resources like water or breaks if permitted. If a candidate is genuinely unable to proceed due to unforeseen circumstances, e.g., illness, the protocol for rescheduling or reporting such issues should be followed, rather than compromising the test itself. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the assessment accurately reflects the candidate's capabilities without bias or external influence.